Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode number X of Security Dumpster podcast. We've got the four of us. I think Sash may join us later. This week, we're going to talk about security and whether we need to make security more agile. And now, is that an agile with a capital A or a small a? So this can be quite a divisive conversation or debate when you've got organizations trying to move faster. So we're going to kick things off. I think we're going to talk to Kevin and just ask him, what does agile mean to you?
Oh yes, I think I definitely fall into the small A probably camp in terms of I think it's being more agile in how we work and breaking work down into smaller chunks, being more engaged are super valuable. So as a team where we are, we've implemented it, but in a fairly lightweight manner. So we still do 12-month planning, and then we still do detailed quarter planning. So we can tell people what we can deliver and things like know when we need help from other people. So there's no point in going to another team saying, I need your help next week. We need to give people notice, right? So we kind of still do some planning. We still define what we're going to deliver. Only a quarter horizon of detail, and then, like I say, like 12 months out and a bit more kind of general what we're going to be doing. And then within those quarters, the teams then break down their stuff into sprints and small chunks. So we firmly believe in doing everything in sprints, delivering value every 2 weeks, breaking our work up into small chunks, using that as a great way to engage with other teams when we're going to need them, what we're going to need them for, those kind of things. But we haven't kind of gone wild with scrums and scrum masters and a whole bunch of other stuff. So we've kept it really light and simple to enable the team to be kind of fast and agile. And one of the benefits, or two of the benefits I've found of it, are my team's super bought into what we're doing because they own what they're doing, and rather than us creating a project plan and giving it to them, they tell us how they're going to do everything. They own all of the how they're going to do it, and they own breaking their tasks up. So they're super engaged, and also enables me to report out really well what we're doing. So I can demonstrate every month, every quarter, exactly what we've delivered because it's all in Jira and it's all in sprints. I can say last quarter we said we're going to deliver these 20 things. Here's what we delivered, all of that kind of good stuff. So it's enabled really good planning, really good reporting, and team engagement. So I think it's had a huge amount of value for us and means we're much more kind of, for want of a better term, and able to deliver more quickly and demonstrate that. But we're not kind of sort of super embedded with the how you must do it. Each part of my team runs their sprints how they want to. Each part of my team does their planning how they want to. We do some learning as well, so we have retrospectives to learn from sprint, that kind of stuff. So we try and keep improving all of those good things as well. So yeah, so I find it hugely valuable. We've taken what we want, it worked for us. We haven't kind of adhered to any kind of doctrine on how you should do it.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, it's probably useful to give some context into the birth of Agile and Lean, probably about 20 years ago now. Everyone's probably heard of waterfall, and then in terms of the standard way that software was built, and then Agile methodologies came about to kind of break those down into chunks, as you've just mentioned, Kevin. I think many companies are still maybe in both worlds. They try to embrace Agile, maybe with a capital A, and maybe failed because they haven't really taken the philosophy behind it, and they've taken more of the practices or processes involved. But Ian, what do you think about here? I think you might have a different take on this.
So no, I get the take of it's useful, use it, right? But I think a lot of organizations play at it because it's the plat du jour, right? Even though it's 20 years old, it's the plat du jour. It's actually a little bit longer in my memory. I remember in my Ministry of Defence apprenticeship, which was about early days, 91, 92, and I went to national cash registers on a day out, on a bit of a jolly. We met the CEO, and the CEO was talking about integrated project teams, smaller projects, defined outcomes, working together, running their own game. And that obviously that predated Agile and stuff like that. So the thought and the idea is not new. I think what slightly annoys me about it is that people jump onto it because it sounds new and refreshing. And my question would be, if you can't do it in waterfall, was it because waterfall was the bad way to do it? Or was it because you didn't have the right people doing the right things at the right time to enable it in that method and that approach that you were doing it at the time? And is actually shifting it to Agile or whatever it'll be called tomorrow, because it will be called something different tomorrow, right? Is by shifting it there, you're not actually solving anything. You're just shifting the problem along. So you're not going to get any again, back to the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different outcomes. If you've got the same constituent parts and the same problems that are not attached to the method, you're still going to have terrible code being written that is easily exploited, that attackers can use to get into your organization. And if the use of things like Agile is supposed to help in that, then why haven't we seen breaches go down? We've just seen breaches go up, and with more ferocity and with greater consequences as well. I'm not blaming Agile for that, by the way. They can call their approach Roger for all I care, as long as it gets the job done at the end of the day. I think that's what we should be looking at, is outcomes rather than what we call it. And hey, you're a Scrum Master today, or you're the Grand Wizard today, or whatever you want to call somebody. I don't really care, but it's outcomes that we should be focusing on. And I think that's what Kev said as well, by the way. I think, Kev uses it for his outcomes and his goals that he communicates effectively to his team. And they've been successful at it. You measure your success. You're only as good as your last game, and you measure your success in outcomes, I believe, rather than whether you've implemented an approach effectively, because that's just ticking a box, right?
Yeah. I mean, Aid, you obviously are a coach and helping organizations move in agile circles. I mean, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I started my career working in manufacturing years ago, where Six Sigma and Lean were key, and we used to optimize factory floors. And then I ended up working in a whole bunch of organizations that were Prince 2 heavy, and I was a Prince 2 project manager. And I tend to agree with Ian, right? Actually, it's not the framework, it's how it's adopted and how it's used. And even things like Prince 2 have a certain amount of agility in it. It was used in the wrong way. And the effectiveness of project managers to keep communicating and adapting to change was always something I've been plagued with in projects I've worked on. So when I hear about organizations working more agile, to be honest, it's like Ian said, it's not about the framework, it's about the communication, it's about how the team works together, it's about how the structure of individuals communicate changing requirements, how the ship needs to steer. Because I think I picked up on what Kevin was saying there. We still need a direction of travel. We still need to have a vision of where we want to get to. But what happens is if we spend too much of our time painting that picture of where we want to get to and thinking that there's only one route to get there, we get really lost when something comes up and like a breach or a new technology or a new vulnerability, and suddenly we have to change path. So I think working with Agile with a small a, for me, is around helping organizations still have a view of where they want to get to, but having a structure in place that means that how they get there, the strategy or the route might change a million times. So are they in a position to be able to adapt to that change as it happens?
Yeah, I mean, brilliant. Just to finish off, I've been reading a book called Transforming Nokia, which back in the day when they one of the preeminent mobile manufacturer in the world, and then they started to lose out to others. iPhone came along, Microsoft started building out their platform. And Nokia started to lose very, very quickly market share, and they just threw thousands of developers at it, implemented agile practices across the organization, but within 18 months had almost imploded. So the book is written by the chairman, he was CEO at the time, about how they turned that around. But the reason for why they failed is that the technical debt that they built, the platform that they had, didn't matter how many developers that they had, it actually just went slower the more developers they had. So many organizations that think, well, we can move faster if we just hire more developers, well, you're ignoring massive elephant in the room.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
interesting and pointless quiz question. What did Nokia start out as?
Hardware manufacturer. Well, actually, before that, it was 100 years ago, they were doing trees. They were cutting down trees. Tires. Logging.
Yeah. So pointless. But if any of the viewers ever are on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and that's the £1 million question, I'm on 50% of it.
So where does all this go? We kind of understand the principles of Agile, and I think we all agree that it can be effective if you understand what the philosophy behind it and what you're trying to do. And DevSecOps, I use that term because I know that creates some dissonance. It's a similar way, you know, breaking down security into chunks, making sure that it's visible to everyone in the organization, showing, you know, the benefits to the business. But what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve with security? There's I think, a perception in the business, and I use the business term loosely, but, you know, within the businesses that we work in, that security is slow to react, doesn't serve the business well. How do we start changing that perception? How do we show demonstrate the value that we're doing? What are the outcomes that we actually need to work towards?
So I'd just like to step back slightly. So I think there's DevOps and Agile often get used interchangeably, and they're not. So you can be Agile in a non-DevOps environment. So how you deliver, for me, Agile is much more around how you plan and deliver your work. I'm probably, you know, may well get argued with on this one, or I'm sure people in the tech will disagree. But Agile is very much about how my team breaks up work and how we deliver it. And I can do that whether we're DevOps or not, right? You don't need DevOps to be Agile. And I think obviously probably most places that are DevOps are probably working in an Agile manner. But we should be distinct about the two. I think we often talk about them in change. I know I do, and I think they should be distinct, because you don't need to be a DevOps house to start working in an Agile way and to gain the benefits of being more Agile in how you plan and deliver work, I think. Anyway, that's
when you work with stakeholders across the business, how do you define your outcomes? How do you show progress?
So I guess there'll be two different sorts, right? So the progress for us is achieving certain project goals or managing risk. So I guess it will depend on your audience. So if it's kind of senior audience, it's going to be around how we manage risk. So we have the key, you know, a bunch of agreed key risks. So how are we making all our work to those key risks and delivering to manage those risks, or how are we enabling certain things? So if there's a project that wants to do something, how do we help enable it happening in a secure manner? So most of what we do is risk reduction or risk management, right? Depending, you know, in various forms. So it's those things, and it's turning it into the business risk language. We'll get back to that kind of talking to the business stuff at this point, right? I guess with engineering teams and project teams, it may be around how you engaged early and how you may have impacted the design, but you didn't impact timelines. So your security solutions or proposals to do something better in a secure or more secure manner enabled us to do it faster and more securely and have less problems later down the line, but also without adding huge amounts of work. So you might have metrics around project would have taken 6 months. It took 6 months with doing it securely rather than it took 2 years. So kind of get through those barriers of security, slow things down is probably a metric that people might want to think about.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, because different organizations, and I'm looking at Ian here, have different risk optics, and they look at things in a different way. You know, they may be not moving fast, they may be more bureaucratic as an organization. And you've worked with many of those larger, more stratified organizations over your career, Ian. What's your thinking around, you know, the outcomes that you're trying to achieve with those organizations?
I think I'm seeing that outcomes. A lot of those organizations, because they're so big and there's so many opinions in there, I think a lot of those organizations lack true leadership, right? And they lack true educated and experienced leadership. And that's not to say the leaders there aren't effective, but actually, if you want to drive security change or you want to drive an approach, you've got to have somebody who is fairly experienced, so it comes to a question we spoke offline about: do you need to be able to code to have? Hey, Sash, do you need to be able to code to be good in this side of things, right? With Agile and DevSecOps and stuff like that. And my kind of argument as a leader would be, no, you don't, but you need an appreciation. You need an appreciation of what those people are going through. And like I said earlier on, I think a lot of organizations pick up a new plat du jour, whether it be Agile, whether it be DevSecOps, whatever it may be, and run with it without really sitting back and asking, is this right for our organization? What are the outcomes that our organization would be looking for from this? Or even more fundamentally, where are we failing on those outcomes today on what we do and how we approach things? Because actually, if you don't know where your baseline is today, you don't know to measure success of what you're going to implement in the future, right? What's that delta? How do I measure that delta? And I think in bigger organizations where it is bureaucratic, there's a lot of fear of turning around to your boss and going, nah, that's just a stupid idea. You know, there's no openness, recriminations, and that top-down heavy approach of do this because your next year's bonus rides on it is really difficult to get out of, right? It's very oppressive. So if you're going to try and speak truth to power, how appropriate is that at the moment? If you're going to try and speak truth to power, they don't want truth, right? They want them to turn around and say, yeah, good idea, boss. Let's move on. Let's do the next thing. And I think that's why so many things fail in bigger organizations, is because there's not enough people, and there isn't an environment where people feel safe to stick their hand up and go, yeah, I think that's a little bit of bullshit. That's what it smells like anyway, you know? That's kind of... Hey,
Yeah,
Sash.
that's it. Hey, Sash, have you got... I love the hair.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Can you get a bit closer to the camera? Let's have a look at that.
We've just discovered why Sash was late.
Wow. That's
All
pretty
morning.
slick.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that is
Yeah,
beautiful.
Hairdresser's
And the
a regular
perm as
game.
well, that took an extra hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome,
Nice to have the crew
welcome.
back together.
Yeah, exactly.
All five
Yeah,
of us.
there are 5. We've just been going through Agile Security and looking at where the outcomes are, where the future of it is. Agile with a big A and a little a. So it'd be interesting now. Aid, you've kind of worked across all different organisations and as well. I totally get what Ian is saying. Is that in other departments, it always seems to be stratified, and we always seem to have a reductionist view of organisations that can excel in one area, but they don't excel across all areas, or they're not working together. And security always seems to be one that's not excelling for whatever reason, and that's perhaps because there's less understanding or accountability of where the organization needs to get to. And is that because of the metrics? We don't have the right kind of metrics or the optics on it. We don't quite know what the destination is because we're getting an ever increasing number of attacks. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think there's 2 sides. I mean, sometimes we lose ourselves in the weeds quite often, right? There's a lot of inefficiency with getting stuck in the nitty-gritty detail of things, and I've time and time again realized that we can't articulate the bigger picture, and that actually then means that if we start going to the business, we are in this world of the weeds, and the business just hear the detail and not necessarily always know the why, what we're actually trying to prevent, what we're actually trying to do at the big picture. So I think there's a lot of scope in security, understanding the why, understanding our values, what we're aiming towards, our ways of working, and being able to kind of really get that higher level view where we can go to the business, but also identify I think it comes down to values and ways of working for us as well within security. I think there's a lot of inefficiencies for us as individuals and teams, that things like Agile doesn't just tell us the what we need to be achieving, it tells us a little bit more about the how. And I think if we can start to adopt different ways of working that are more agile, it then helps us to understand more about the world of what's happening outside of security, in things like engineering and development, where they're already ahead of the curve a little bit in that sense. So I think, the question you asked about sort of that vision, it still amazes me how we can't describe an elevator pitch about what we're doing, or our top 10 priorities or top 5. And if every member of the team can get to that point where they understand what the goal is for the security team and can communicate that to any single stakeholder around the business in a couple of paragraphs, then that's a real win that very rarely do we have as security teams.
But don't you think, Aid, that's the old analogy of why do you have brakes on a car? So you don't have brakes on a car to stop. You have brakes on a car so you can go faster and stop safely. And I think we as an organization in security have always been the brakes are there to stop you doing stupid stuff, right? Rather than we're there to help the business go as fast as it's willing to go within the boundaries it sets itself. But should it need to, then they always know that we're there to help them apply the brakes safely so they can stop in a safe distance. And that's a subtly different message, right?
Well, I mean, so you've just captured beautifully what I'd call a value as part of the vision, right? It's just like maybe our old values were we need to be putting control and rigor around something, but actually the new world value is we're here to make you go faster, right? So if a security organization can sort of articulate their top values in this new world, and a security analyst, an engineer, a CISO, and everybody shares that same view and might be saying, hey, we're here to take the break, putting brakes on to allow you to go faster, then I think that's the win, right? And maybe it's a different set of values we've got to start articulating, but I still hold true that the whole team needs to share that vision and those values, I think, whatever they are.
But I think that's an awesome analogy for enabling, right? Which is what we all talk about. So how does security enable us to get things done quickly? How do we? I think metric we talked about earlier, Simon, wasn't it? Around security was involved early in a project, and doing it securely didn't take any longer to deliver than the project was already envisaged to take. So how do we get that metric around? We've enabled the business to do all of these things really well and securely. So I guess the question is, and probably for all of us and our listeners, is what metrics can you use to demonstrate that, so you can show that value that we are enabling speed, and we are, as well as talking enabling, we are actually doing that. And to Ian's point, we've let you go as fast as you want to do, and within risk tolerance or whatever.
And metrics is an amazing point. Actually, it's probably a whole different thing, but for some it's the 0 to 60. For some, it's the 0 to 100. For some, it's straight line, flat out top line speed. For some, it's the torque they can pull through a corner. And I think that's, again, when we tie all this together and come back, that's the job of a CISO, to understand on that dashboard, what are the things that the board need to understand to enable them to go as fast as they can, but still stop securely.
Awesome stuff. Just changing tack slightly. I've worked with lots of large organizations over my career, and I've always found actually one of the biggest impediments to moving fast is the amount of overlap of processes that they have. So one of the things that we've been really effective at doing is doing what's called value chains or value stream mapping, and looking at your entire processes and understanding, okay, where have you got duplication? Where do you have to talk to 5 different compliance departments or 20 different compliance departments if you might be a bank? And understanding, actually, we can automate this bit and automate that bit, because otherwise, over the years, you just get layers and layers of compliance and security controls which don't take account of the existing controls, and you just get a whole mishmash. And I find I'm starting to see more organizations start to look at that in earnest and figure out, okay, if we start reducing that burden, that process mesh that we've got, we're actually going to very simply just start moving forward a lot quicker, because our processes will be a lot quicker. What are your thoughts on that?
Just briefly, I think for me, agility doesn't mean no process. Actually, agility means, like you say, a streamlined bunch of effective, efficient processes that aren't overlapping. So sometimes a little bit more process, a bit of rigor, automation allows you to be more agile. Whereas I think misconception sometimes is that agile means taking process out. It's quite the opposite, I think. It's about what you're saying there is actually looking at the value chain and doing the right processes.
Yeah, I mean, often we throw tools at things rather than actually understanding the process and understanding where tools can fit in and optimize, automate, but we don't actually look at that whole chain.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think I think Ian's dislike of agile ways of working is probably a combination. I'll talk for him, but probably a combination of where people either rigorously adhere to doctrine as opposed to applying it appropriately, or they use it as an excuse for nothing. So you so often have like, oh, we haven't got any docs because we're agile. It's like, well, that's bollocks. So it's literally your docs. Your docs may be a different format. They may be a wiki, or they may be in code or whatever else. But claiming you are unable to provide me with a picture of what your system looks like because agile is fundamentally broken, and people just hiding behind agile and DevOps an excuse to not document what they're doing. If your system can't be picked up by someone else based on the documentation, you have absolutely failed to produce something that's manageable and supportable. And I so often hear that. So I think a lot of the issues are people using it inappropriately, as opposed to going, hey, we've got a goal. We know as an organization what our goals are. As a product or tech team, we know that our key metrics are gain X customers or get into X markets or deploy X capabilities. So those business metrics will be achieved. And then to get that, we'll break down into small chunks. So we'll iterate our way through achieving that. And you can do that whether it's security or product or whatever else. But you've still got your clear goals, and you've still got clear metrics you should be adhering to. And what you produce should still be scalable, maintainable, supportable, secure, with enough, not overly done with enough documents and guidance that if you or your team were to be replaced, someone else could pick it up and go, oh, here's some really cool docs that say how this works. So I think you need that balance.
Yeah,
I
totally.
think one of the problems I see is that obviously compliance is brought in often as a remedy when problems are discovered, but it's almost as though compliance is acted on retrospectively. So it's kind of, you'll have a team that develops something to meet a business goal. So you'll have an agile team that does something that increases revenue or brings on more customers. And then they realize they've got a load of customer PII in a data store somewhere. Then they'll reference the compliance, and they'll have a way of kind of hacking something together to go and fix that problem. I still don't think that there's anyone that's putting compliance in at the design stage and making it part of each sprint. You still see people, sprints are only kind of designed to meet business goals. They're still not designed to meet any superfluous goal that isn't included in the main business kind of goals. So I think it comes back to the age-old problem that you've got to get senior management and the business on board with security and compliance. And I'm still yet to see very few companies that actually give a damn about compliance other than avoiding fines and bad PR.
Yeah, it's the non-functional requirements piece, right? How do you make everyone as accountable and concerned with a whole range of non-functional things? So it's great to get a shiny piece of product out, but is it completely suitable and secure and compliant and scalable? All the other things you need as well, right? And I guess it's the analogy a bit like with kind of regulation. If you don't do things right, sooner or later someone comes in and regulates it badly. So you end up with a whole bunch of legal requirements to adhere to that you all hate because they're terrible, because none of us have done the appropriate stuff in the first place. Sorry, and I think you're about to jump in.
Yeah, I just think. Oh, Ian, you go.
Sorry, Sash. I was just going to build on compliance. It's an interesting hobby horse of mine at the moment. Is that compliance in and of itself doesn't do anything, right? I think more than anything, it hinders a lot of organisations because it provides them with a ceiling that they hit up against rather than break through and move on somewhere else. You know, when you've got to do something or fill a checkbox in, you do it because you have to do it. You don't do it because you want to do it and it's inbuilt within you and that's the right thing to be doing. You're doing it to meet something, and therefore I think that's why a lot of compliance fails. I think that's why a lot of the management don't buy into it fully. They're paying lip service to it. And I think that when you look at going beyond that and look at the maturity of organizations, those who adopt a more assurance mentality around things, around efficacy, around maturity, around risk appetite, around are we meeting all of these and what does that mean to our organization? I think you'll find you've got more chance of making a success of new processes and new procedures, whether they've got a capital A or a little a within their organizations, you know?
Yeah, I mean, great point. I mean,
maturity.
Go on, Sash.
Yeah, I just think you see the maturity thing is a big problem that holds companies up. And I think within companies that are very agile, that more often than not, they're not thinking long term. They're all just very surprised that they've managed to have a company that's lasted 10 years and they've maybe got a startup mentality still. And so for them to move into a mature state means that they need to take a slower approach and deal with compliance in a completely different way, where they're still very much focused on very short-term goals. And I think it's definitely a company maturity thing, kind of saying, okay, we need to take this seriously and we need to start playing a long-term game and think about, okay, yeah, we did 10 years, let's plan for 50 years. What's our 50-year business plan?
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, actually sometimes just squeezing more and more work in, getting more and more tactical stuff, more and more, hey, we've got to do this and this, actually ends up meaning that you're totally inefficient and you achieve less over a longer period of time anyway. Sometimes putting the brakes on a little bit gives you a bit of focus, gives you a little bit of attention that you can achieve more.
Is that because, though, and again, possibly a different conversation, is that because most organizations are set up nowadays to exit between 5 and 10 years so their founders can go and live on an island somewhere in complete anonymity? You know, people, Mr. Marks and Mr. Spencer, whoever they were, didn't do that at that time. They set up a business that has then gone for 100 plus years. We very rarely see them these days. You know, there's no longevity in it, with short-termism all the time. And I think that is possibly the different conversation at a different time. Is short-termism part of this problem?
Different risk appetite suddenly comes into that, doesn't it?
Well, I think that's a huge, that's a societal question as well, right? It's the whole, whether it's stock markets, whether it's parliaments you re-elect every 4 years, whether it's companies having a 3-month planning horizon, whatever it is. I think short-termism is a issue that we could discuss at the kind of huge scale of is it an issue with our entire kind of Western culture as well as an issue with companies.
But let's get practical for a second. How for the large organizations that have compliance concerns, how can we actually bring them into the conversations earlier, get the put them into the guardrails if that's what it means, but how do we actually embed those kind of principles into our thinking from an early stage?
I could be wrong. I'm Sasha great, but I think when Sasha was talking compliance, were you just meaning more compliance with doing the right thing as well as just compliance with a bunch of regulatory rules, right? How do you build in compliance to doing security and compliance with your kind of organizational requirements into sprints rather than just compliance for kind of regulation's sake? Was
but that's kind of going to be, it's more around the assurance part actually that Ian was talking to, because then compliance is just one part of your whole assurance around what you're doing as an organization. So how do we start to take, if you're going on that journey around assurance, how do you start to embed those principles into the organization at an earlier stage so that you can really start to live those principles? Does that make sense?
So is that, again, we're going to go back to culture, aren't we? So is that just where culturally non-functional stuff is expected as part of a deliverable from a sprint? Is that kind of what we need to get to? Sorry, Sash, I think you were going to say something as well.
Yeah, I think from what I see, engineering teams and product managers and people like that, they're always often aware of the pitfalls of what they're doing, and by writing code and spinning stuff up, it's always in the back of their mind. And I'd see a really effective approach is where security teams and people responsible for kind of keeping people on the right track are somehow embedded within these smaller teams, whether they rotate round or that these teams know that the security teams are always available to ping questions to, rather than them being kind of this team that sits outside of the development and the engineering, and they're brought in to kind of crack the whip or show people where they're wrong. Security teams need to be embedded within engineering, however you do that. That's where I've at least seen it being effective.
This is a wonderful topic, I think, for over the next coming weeks. Security engineering, which is a personal favorite of mine. Does security need to be able to script and code, or does it need to be more cross-functional? I think that's going to be a great topic. I'm going to love that podcast. But I guess Spotify created a model which actually maybe never used, but he created that philosophy where you have cross-functional teams and you pull in strands across the business that come in and they rotate through development teams. So you might have compliance people that come in, risk people that come in, and they actually get to understand both sides, both parties. The engineers get to understand what the compliance requirements are for the organization and vice versa. So that's, for me, an interesting model. I'm not sure that how widespread that is or how easily that is to build from an organization point of view. I think, Ade, you've probably got some thoughts here.
Yeah, I have actually. I was just watching the time as well because I have to run off and stop the recording in about 3 minutes there. So I'm just wondering if we circle back to the agile side of things and whether we just have a round table perhaps of where organizations might start, or a couple of top tips if that's
true. Let's open it up. Where do organizations start? Agile with a small a.
Yeah.
Go on, Kev. I was just going to.
I was saying, so for me, it's we don't often do that. We've done well. I'd say for me, it's kind of start looking at how you break work up into smaller chunks, still have your longer term planning horizon, and focus on. I guess it's like Ian said, it's the outcome piece. So focus on what your outcomes are and how you deliver the most value for your organization, and how you can demonstrate that delivery and align best with the different areas of your organization to get that done. It's all about the outcomes and delivery for me.
Great. Ian?
Yeah, it's outcomes. Call it what you want. I really don't care. It's outcomes. You're only as good as your last game, and that's what we should be living and dying by.
As long as you know what your outcomes should be. Sash?
Yeah.
Sash, any final comments?
Yeah, I think organizations just need to remember that Agile is it's a smaller cog in a longer term goal. So just remember that you're doing Agile to meet short-term goals, and not necessarily that should be the way you're working as a business.
Brilliant. Aid, final comment?
Yeah, I just suppose I'll add a different tack to that is ways of working. So enable teams to have a culture of looking to find their bottlenecks and focus on ways that can speed them up, make them more effective and efficient, to enable them to deliver more, rather than overloading everyone with thousands of tasks. So focus on bottlenecks and tool.
Speaking on that, there's a great book called Team of Teams, which was partly written by General MacArthur, who was in Iraq, and took a highly reductionist way of working with military and expanded it out so that they could collaborate across the wider task forces and the wider military. Really fascinating book, also from a business perspective. They weave a lot of business aspects into this. That's the final comment from me. If you're interested in team dynamics and how to work across and bridge those silos, then read Team of Teams. And with that, I think we'll end it. And thank you very much, people. It's been awesome. And we will see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Peace out.
Cheers.
Bye.
Video.